I'm Gail Chovan, and the name of my show is No Trace of Now Will Remain. It is a line from a poem by the Frenchman Arthur Rimbaud, and it harkens to for me, the ephemeral quality of clothing especially, but also of a time period that obviously is in the past. And when I use the pieces I use to make the different works in the show, I use things that are 100 years old, kind of to fight against what the title of the show means. So although we're saying No Trace of Now Will Remain, I'm actually using things that may not be used again with their original intent. So all of these pieces are made up of pieces from the past, and I don't think any of them could survive without that nod to kind of a past life. There are different themes that go on, from mourning jewelry from the time of Queen Victoria to my favorite French poets. And years ago, I fell in love with this poet, Paul Valéry. And one of the lines from this poem I really like is Le noir n'est pas si noir. And when you walk in the show, it's on a very dark wall, in a dark kind of a maze, and it's in neon. And it actually means the dark is not so dark. So it's kind of an ironic take on seeing it in light against a black wall. And then immediately across from it, it says in English, the dark is not so dark. And it's always been one of my favorite sayings, because I think that often people look at black or darkness as kind of being sinister or macabre. And to me, I think it's peaceful, it's lovely, there's a certain vitality of the night. And I actually wrote it on the wall of my shop that I own years ago, 20 years ago. And I would look at that every day, and people would question me about it, and I'd tell this story. And then 12 years ago, my children were born, my twins, and my daughter was born blind. And one day, she must have been 2 or 3, and I looked up at the wall and I saw that quote, which I did every day, but all of a sudden it hit me that it was saying the dark is not so dark, and that's exactly her world. People always think that somebody that's visually impaired lives in darkness, and actually she's so full of light and so full of energy and what she puts out to the world. She doesn't need sympathy, she barely needs guidance. And so that quote became even more special to me. I had this idea for the sculpture when you enter that there's 100 sets of plaster dental molds, and I always wanted to make a skirt out of teeth. And the closest I could get was sourcing a collection from a dentist in the early 90s. But that total process has been going on for decades. So that's kind of one example of how I have this idea or this inspiration, and then I specifically seek out the materials for that piece that I want to make. But sometimes these pieces are just found, like buying human hair from a wig shop outside of Paris that closed, or from the very specific chairs that I sourced to do my surrealist nod to these poems that I then lit with neon from underneath. So my processes can be that I design and then look for the pieces that I need, Or in the case of some of these gowns, I had two giant gowns and I knew I wanted them to be white and black, and I just ravaged through everything I have to see what spoke to me and how I could build them. The chairs were sourced so they had a nice surface that I could paint on, and there is the poem by Rimbaud, from which the title of the show comes from. Also the poem by Valérie of the Le Noir n'est pas si noir. And again, it is a nod to surrealism in that I dressed the chairs in Victorian clothing. I even put them in shoes, but they're not furniture. They cease to be furniture. They take on kind of a life as almost a person in that they're wearing clothing. And so the same thing with the tailcoat in that it's hanging on this neon hanger, but the inside of it is an homage to my children because it's lines from a song by the Frenchman Serge Gainsbourg, and he sang this song with his daughter, and it's called Lemon Incest, and it's about how they have such a love for each other, but it's obviously a love that is not sexual, it's not incestuous on a physical level, but it is such a beautiful, rare, and pure love that a parent has for their child. And the lines are really beautiful because they talk about how it is troubling, but it's pure and it's simple, and how that child is always going to be your baby, and it's really a lovely song. So those three pieces kind of take on this human form, even though they're a combination of clothing and light emerging from the clothing, and then also these words that mean a lot to me. There are several things that I hope that people will take away from this show. And overall, it's an appreciation or finding beauty in these strange pieces from the past that have kind of fallen by the wayside and now are given new life. And I hope that people will come in and get a feeling of calmness and of elegance for these pieces, a feeling of introspection, a feeling of, despite the darkness, there's so much light in our world, and that we just need to stop and kind of wonder and find that light wherever we can, even in the most unexpected places.